You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast, and this week we're taking a look at Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and in typical Goldilocks style, giving you our too hot, not too cold, and just right takes on cards from this set. So with that, let's get it taken away.
So for me, the card that I think is overhyped, like beyond belief, is Jace Reawakened. This is one of the two Planeswalkers from the set. This Jace costs 2 for 3 loyalty. Passive ability that says you can't cast this spell during your first, second, or third turns of the game. The +1, draw a card, then discard a card. -1, I think, is where the value for this card sits. You may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. And then the ultimate, I don't think you're ever going to hit. It's all about the plot.
Yeah.
Now, when this card was spoiled, people realized pretty quickly that the timing restriction just says your turn. So it was something like a Leyline of Anticipation on board or Alchemist Refuge. You can cast this on your opponent's second or third turn of the game without hitting the restriction. So cool, fine, awesome.
Sure.
Like, people read through the limitation pretty easily. Now, if this hits, it will have to be in Standard when the format slows to be maybe a turn 4-ish kind of format. To be slower than a turn 4-ish kind of format, because that's where we are right now. At the moment, the red deck in the format is keeping things pretty honest, and things are moving pretty quickly. Now, while Jace Reawakened does play to a longer game, and you wouldn't want to plot any of the spells required to get to the late game, as they generally allow you to cast your late game, which is Atraxa, they do need to be cast on curve. So Jace kind of like plays into that a little bit. But you don't, that's not the value you want to be getting with Jace. You want to be able to plot something meaningful at 1, 2, or 3, and plotting your ramp spells is not necessarily where you need to be when you need to be casting other spells on time that need to keep you alive. We have, Sunfall, and a handful of other wraths that need to be played. There's the green spell Herd Migration that makes a bunch of tokens that kind of keeps you going along the way. It gives you some blockers along the way. You can't plop that. It can only be hard cast. And at some point in time, you just run out of actual spells to plot with Jace. And so I just think that right now there are people looking at this and thinking, like, either you can plot cards you can't, or that this is going to be meaningful in Standard in a way that doesn't really exist right now. I think this is just kind of a redundant piece in the ramp shell. The Esper, the Azor, the Dimir Schooner decks that existed were basically pushed out of the format by the red deck. The red deck is just a little too fast, too furious when everything has haste, and we just got that other bird that has haste as well, the rare that went from like $3 to $18.
Yeah.
That thing's pretty decent. It slides into the Prowess deck in Modern, which basically just mucks Jace. I just don't think there's a place for this card to play right now. It might happen in the future when Standard slows down, but I just think that the people were really interested in trying to cheat this into play, and they have attached a bit of fervor and aggrandized this a little too much for my liking.
Yeah, this was one that I almost picked myself as overhyped, because it's to me the worst part actually is the passive clause.
Yeah.
It kills the card. It's so bad, and I don't understand if there's some interaction I'm not seeing, because again, like you said, it doesn't really have much of a home where it makes sense for it to be where it's at financially. And I just don't see what all the hype around this card is from the second it got spoiled, outside of, I guess, Jace isn't dead anymore.
Yeah.
Which I'm angry about. I wanted him to stay dead forever, as I've said on the show. So this card just makes me angry.
Yeah.
In conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's perfectly fine until we get spells that you want to cast on 3, on 4 that
Yep.
aren't ramp spells that are important to the game, I don't think Jace is going to matter. Like, we're not going to get something like Slag Storm back, or that kind of red wrath
No.
that generally fits into the 2 or 3 mana slot. You're basically just going to be plotting some kind of like mid-range creatures, which is perfectly fine if the metagame allows for it. Something like Crypticoat would be decent. You know, plot one, cast the other, cool story. Or you have just some, you know, value creature to tuck away for later that doesn't natively have plot. But the only deck, like I said, that this really fits in, that works well in standard right now, is the ramp deck. And you don't want to plot your ramp spell on your turn 3 after casting Jace to be cast on 4. You want to cast the ramp on 3 to get you +1 for the next turn, to then start slamming endgame threats. Jace just kind of slows you down in that regard. You actually went with a mechanic for your overhyped business.
Yes.
Which I kind of like.
Spree is dumb. I'm sorry. It's modal kicker without a spell. It's just kicker with extra steps. The meme has finally been realized where every mechanic is kicker. This is literally just kicker. Right? And the flagship card for this is Final Showdown, which is 1 white and Spree. +1 colorless for the part of humility where they lose all abilities. +1 colorless for choose a creature you control. It gains indestructible until end of turn. +2 white and 3 colorless for Wrath. That's a 6 mana Wrath.
Well, it's Route. It's a
Sorry?
6 mana route, but it requires one more. It's 1 colorless, 1 mana cheaper, but it requires 1 more white to cast route.
Yeah,
this time around.
This mechanic is just dumb, and it is proof that we are out of design space. We've literally started removing to make space now because we removed the spell from this, and here's new design space. It's awful. It's lazy design, and it's a mechanic that hasn't made an impact in any format in the history of ever. Except Shattering Spree for Legacy for a while to kill Chalice.
All right. To be fair, let's not say that, because Urza's what? Rage?
Yeah, Urza's Rage.
Possibly good in that standard format, a little bit of extended. Yeah.
Insane. Yeah, that's true.
Everflowing Chalice is good. Like, there's not a lot. There's a blue Spree spell that actually people were going nuts over.
Well, Giga Drowse for a while was a win condition in Pauper.
Yeah, what is this thing? There's the worst cancel.
Yeah.
That targets like there's like one good Spree spell, and that's
Lose Focus is a really good one.
Yeah. Otherwise, I agree. I played.
It's not good often enough, and I get that Final Showdown is instant speed, and that's cool because you can on attack. There's cool combat tricks. I just don't know when I would ever want to use generally this mechanic, or when it's good enough. It's just not. These cards, every card with Spree is bad. It just looks bad. I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't rather just count or cast its non-kicker counterpart. It doesn't make sense to me, and I don't get why people are saying that this opens up design space and everything. No, it doesn't. It's just bad. Yeah. This is a bad mechanic. This set is bad because this mechanic is in it.
It is modal. It's modal multi-kicker, and it's really weird.
Without a spell.
Yeah, the Riku card is fine, but the support for it is kind of bad. My prize pack, I think I might have it sitting next to me from my pre-release. I opened the Riku, which basically is the Spree mechanic Riku. Yeah. Come on. Let's see. What do we got? Yep. This package is insane. Riku, loot, and then there's Caught in the Crossfire. If this was like a limited pack, this thing would be nuts. But yeah. So Riku and Caught in the Crossfire, right? They fed me the Spree mechanic in Riku, but it is Caught in the Crossfire deals 2 damage to each outlaw creature when Riku is not an outlaw, so you don't blow up Riku. Or Caught in the Crossfire deals 2 damage to each non-outlaw creature, which would not quite blow up Riku, but it would deal 2 of the 3 damage necessary to kill him. It costs 2 double red. It's an instant, and then the Spree values are 1 colorless each. And like that is okay for limited, but this is not a card you can build around because we don't have enough good modal spells in Teamer to play them all, or play enough to make this good. So even some of the supporting cast around this mechanic is a little weak. It doesn't worry me that we're going to see this. I think the only thing that makes me happy about it after seeing it in person, poo-pooing it at my pre-release and watching people kind of fumble over it, is that knowing that this is, I'll put quotes around the word new design space, but the initial rollout was so bad that it wasn't overwhelming like certain new keywords have been.
Yeah.
So if we do see Spree in the future, maybe they'll actually bump it up and make it worthwhile. But right now, yeah, you're right. It's just not. It is. It leaves me wanting, basically.
Yeah, it's laughable.
Yeah. Yep. Moving into underhyped for me, it took a while to find this because I felt like a lot of the set was pretty like either things were overhyped or just about right. But once I read through, I found this one and I thought it was. As I started reading through Rec, this one kind of came out, and this is a Cabal Profiteering Mayor. It's 1, a white, and a black for a 2/4 human advisor. Whenever one or more tokens enters the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them create a tapped token that's a copy of it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So if they make X tokens, you'll get X tokens, but if they make 2 tokens, 1 in their first main and 1 in the second main, you'll only get 1 of those. That's how that ability reads. Then the second ability on this is whenever 1 or more tokens enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is the Suture Priest kind of thing, the drain and gain. And I think this is underhyped because people might be looking at this card pretty incorrectly. You look at this as a card in the 99 because it doesn't quite make sense as a commander. Orzhov tokens, not really a thing. This is great within an Abzan token deck, whatever you want to do with it, right? Or just as a Taxes piece in an Abzan deck. This sits just outside the top 20 cards in the set overall when you look at Rec. And I would guess that people didn't even realize this was a card unless they opened it or played against it. But it is one of the top 20 cards in the set, and that is behind a handful of the lands. So just think about that. How many people have been talking about this card, and it's one of the top 20 cards in the set, and it costs 7 cents right now. It is a bulk rare for a top 20 card in this set. It's behind the set's guild gates, on top of the, what do we call them now, the enemy fastlands. Tells an interesting story of people valuing cards in this set fairly oddly in regards to Commander. For a card that offers basically anti-token passives, this can do a lot at most tables, and I would expect people to want to enable a bit of this kind of counterplay, pun intended. And the best part is that you can run this, like I said, in Abzan tokens and win the game outside of combat, as the drain hits all players at once. I think there's a lot more going on with this card than people are seeing right now, and I think it's because it's being overshadowed by some weird things and like just overlooked because there's some shiny new toys for some older strategies. This is something that's kind of brand new. We don't usually tax people like this for creating tokens. So,
I love this card. It's similar. I think that the only places I've seen it talked about are fringe cases for CEDH for like Splinter Twin, which does nothing. And I haven't seen anyone discussing it. But this kind of effect to me is like, I love it because it means that they're finding a way to put a card in a set that makes sense and is effective counterplay to common strategies.
Yep.
And I think Magic is better when those things exist just because it forces you to play differently. You can't just have a linear path to victory. You have to understand you may branch out. And the fact that it is a bulk rare is wild, at least long term. I don't think it will be above bulk for a bit, but it definitely should be.
Yep.
I, on the other hand, went with a card that has a fair amount of hype behind it. I just think that long term, it's going to be much more impactful than people are saying it is now. And that is Oko the Ringleader. Now, this one has one of the most interesting clauses. At the beginning of combat on your turn, he becomes a copy of up to 1 target creature you control until end of turn, and he has hexproof. +1, draw 2. If you've committed a crime, discard a card. Otherwise, discard 2. -1 is still make an elk without the token on top to lose abilities, and then -5 doesn't matter. Card has 3 loyalty at 4 mana and becomes a copy of any creature you control.
Yeah.
In colors that love making copies for a lot of reasons. I think this will eventually become a staple in casual EDH, anything Simic really, because there's always some kind of value you can get for that. I think drawing is obviously great, especially in green. You don't have a lot of it. Blue has plenty of other choices. And it's not something that anyone I've seen talk about has said, oh, this is absolutely going in my next EDH deck, or I know an insane deck. Mm-hmm. Everyone's excited about the possibilities. So I think that's going to fall off, and people won't talk about it for a while, and eventually you'll see it in like the top 100 of EDH rec potentially, because this card screams casual and it screams affordable planeswalker.
Yeah.
And both of those things make it great long term.
Yeah, even the drawback on the draw spell is easy to overcome and lighten the load, because you're in Simic and it's pretty easy to commit a crime against your opponents in Simic. Because you're playing Simic that starts out as a crime, but after that you have a number of ways to like interact with the board. From something as like innocuous as Beast Within, which can be, offensive or defensive, or Snap, which is just purely an offensive spell on every level, you can just like muck with the board in a way that reducing the discard from 2 to 1 is pretty easy overall. And it's not to say that you can't get value out of discarding cards either, because again, you're in Simic, so you have a number of ways to like generate value from the graveyard. Either if you're discarding lands, you can bring them back with ramming up Excavator. You have like Seasons Past and an infinite number of regrowth effects to rebuy that kind of value.
Yep.
You're not Golgari per se, but when you start splashing this into Sultai, now playing out of the graveyard is a really good idea. And maybe you don't want to commit crimes because you do want 2 cards in the graveyard, right? So I think there's a pretty wide open space for this card to run in, and I like it overall for that. If you want to look at it as making a copy of something, I think the only knock against it is that if you make a copy of a legendary creature, it's still legendary, so you have that little like Groundhog's Day thing. But other than that, I think it's a really good card overall, and I'm surprised to find out that like the most interesting art of this, every version of this card seems to be under $2 right now.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's just like the set's finally getting open, prices are coming down a bit, and if this is a card that I was going to hedge on, I'd probably like hedge $10 on this card and pick up a bunch, because why not? Yeah. This just seems, like you said, it's a really good card overall. I think this kind of fits with what I was talking about with Jace. Like, you need standard to slow down a little bit, like pull back, like let's enjoy standard and what's going on, and then Oko can go into like the ramp deck and do more. Like, sure, you can't copy an Atraxa like poo-poo, but at the end of the day, that deck can do some big things, and if the creatures shift to non-legendary creatures alongside Atraxa, cool, you got this. Like this just seems like a really good card overall. I like it. It's a lot more palatable than the original Oko, so it's nice to see this card like attempt
significantly
to do away with that. Like for me, the just right hype is surrounding this version of Tiny Bones, unlike the last one, which I just thought was a dumpster because I hate Punisher cards and I hate the Punisher mechanic. Tiny Bones, the Pickpocket. I think this card is just rightly hyped. It is a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch. Whenever Tiny Bones, the Pickpocket, deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So this seems best as a commander, and as such, it looks like it's already in the correct spot. It's in the top 10 commanders from the set. Awesome. This version of Tiny Bones isn't offensive like the previous version, as I mentioned before. It's incredibly easy to play as well as manage because it's just a little 1/1. It's not a Punisher card. It just kind of lets the mono black deck play the early game by stealing ramp and draw spells on the way to the mid and late game, where this can also like play pretty interestingly by coming back from the command zone, maybe picking up a pair of boots, swinging in, and then recasting an important spell from somebody's graveyard. I like this interaction on the card itself. I think it's just really good. It's not the best commander in the set overall, but it's definitely like a solid top 10 commander from this set, because I think one of the things that this version does compared to the other is that it doesn't espouse a tightening of the resources of a game. You don't have to play that. You can just play a like inverse Zhao He Dun, for those that remember that card from Portal of Judge promo. Like, it's a colorless double black 2/2, but that doesn't matter. What matters is you demonic tutor your own graveyard. So you can just buy reanimate spells, whatever you need, your value, etc. Tiny Bones is like I said, kind of the inverse, where you just demonic tutor your opponent's graveyards. So you can just play what they're playing. You don't have to put them in the hard lock. You don't have to tighten the grips on, your grip on the game. You can just kind of relax, dirtle through your library, pay some life to draw some spells, like set up a fort basically, and just start poking away with a little 1/1 commander and stealing board wipes or token generators, whatever you need. I just think that this card is going to be pretty fun overall and maintain a top 10 spot. I don't think it's going to be the number one, not by far. I just think it's going to be a good commander from this set.
Yeah, I think he's great. I also think that this is the kind of card that, in addition to being appropriately hyped for EDH, I could see this potentially breaking out in some kind of modern list. Not necessarily as good as Ragavan, obviously. That's why we're not going to see it in Legacy, but it does have a similar effect. So I wouldn't be surprised if some scam players try it as a 2 or 3 of in there, just to see if they're able to get extra value off of it.
This is not the first time I've made reference to this meme in the last couple of weeks in regards to Legacy scam, but it's going to be the exact same thing as the mirror. Like, when you introduce Tiny Bones into that mirror and you cast those reanimates, it's the Star Wars meme of like the 2 Jedis just flickering each other's lightsabers. Like, that's all. The Tiny Bones, you're just like swinging and trying to get each other's like reanimates before the other one can recast it. Like,
and I think that could cause it to go up even further. But yeah, I think this one's good. My appropriately hyped was also a creature, and that was Vraska the Silencer. She's a 3/3 for 3 with Death Touch, and has one of the most interesting abilities I've seen in a very long time. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, return it to the battlefield tapped under your control, except that now it's a treasure.
Yes.
This creates some of the most fascinating counterplay to Animator that I have ever seen. And I think that this kind of graveyard shenanigan is something that Wizards has been pushing Golgari since basically original Theros. It's something that I could see sticking long-term in the $5 range as a card in the 99. I could see like Marin Stacks lists trying to run this. It's just something that I think has a lot of utility and a lot of extra value, because not only are you denying your opponent resources, you're also ramping yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is something that if we ever get the elementals out of Modern and the format slows down again, could see play there, and I could certainly seeing it see play in Pioneer if ever a Golgari deck rises to prevalence again.
Yep.
It's a card that everyone I've seen has said this is a very effective card without a home, and I think that's probably true right now. But I think that when you see the tank on release, it'll be a bulk rare, and then when it finds its home, it'll be a $5 card again. It's just very efficiently costed, does something unique and interesting that involves the graveyard and colors that care about the graveyard.
Yep. I agree. I think the other important part of this is that I'm pretty sure the creature keeps all its triggered abilities.
Yes, it just loses all other card types, but it keeps its abilities.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that also is something dangerous about this card, is that it's returning a creature to the battlefield in a very unique way, like you mentioned. So you can ramp yourself, but you're also able to take advantage of whatever triggers are there.
Avenger, anything like that. Guess what?
Yep.
Boom.
My second round opponent played this against me at the pre-release, and I just untapped and O-ringed the hell out of this thing because I did not want to deal with it. I'm already going to lose my creatures in combat, and I don't need you ramping off of me and or making copies of them. We're cool here. Bruce Tarl is staying on my side of the board. This card can just rack up incredible advantage overall. I'd be excited to see this play in Standard, because that means we have a fairly creature-heavy Standard. Yeah. But to make this card good, that means the red deck has to slow down, or the red deck creatures have to change, because you don't want to really be copying them for the mid-range deck. But a 3/3 with Death Touch does kind of stuff what's going on in that deck in the early game. So if you can land, it's pretty good. I don't think this is going to change the format on its own. We might have some
No.
pieces to do that. But overall, I could see this card just kind of slinking away for a little while. It's currently like a $4 mythic, it looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, why the heck not? Like, just move in. Like, I think it's pretty sweet. And overall, like, I'd be upset if we were back in a green soup standard again, like just mid range. But
Yeah.
I like the card for commander applications more than anything else. Like you mentioned,
Agreed.
it's really interesting, the 99. I don't think this does anything as a commander because it's so weird.
It's so narrow.
Yeah, usually you want your Golgari commander to do something with your deck. You want it to do something for you. And this doesn't play into any specific strategy. It just kind of promotes stealing somebody else's stiff.
Yeah.
But overall, another card that is just hyped well for now, and hopefully we see more of in the future. Anything else? Anything else before picks?
Let's do it.
All right, you got a card from this set, so you can talk about it.
Yes. So I am picking Terror of the Peaks, OG version. Why? Because it's getting a meaningful reprint. And yes, we recently, if you take a look at the stocks graph, did have a cratering. Doesn't matter. We're going to get another cratering on release. Once all of this starts flooding in and we have drafts and everything else, this card's going to go down. And this is more of a call out ahead of time of, hey, this is potentially one of the biggest gainers because it was a mythic in a small print runs core set that people forgot about. And then it just gradually, if you look at the graph, went up until confirmation of reprint, and then it cratered. So if we continue this trajectory, we're just going to keep going up. I just wanted to mention it because it's not very often that we get a reprint like this that was a standard card with a good price point.
Yep.
We're going to see a glut of supply, so I can only imagine that this card is going to be down to $10 to $15 because it's already below 20. That's when I would be buying in, because this was a card that you could always sell as soon as you got it in stock, because there is so much demand for this kind of thing in EDH, in casual kitchen table Magic. It's an incredibly efficient card, huge glut of a low pop. Just seemed like a good opportunity to call it out.
Yeah, I like this overall. Terror of the Peaks is one of those dragons that just kind of makes its home in a number of commander decks, from the Dragons deck to just red decks that want to play into the 5-drop slot or above, some people that just need
damage, anything.
A sticky finisher. This card doesn't literally have ward pay 3 life, but it's close enough that it is kind of a deterrent. For removal, there's the opportunity for it to do something in standard. It doesn't have haste, so it is. It's not a huge knock. It's just a bit of one.
It does give the red deck extra reach, though, so maybe it breaks out there.
Yeah, it did. If I remember correctly, it was kind of a combo kill because of its trigger. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peak deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So there was a way to kind of combo off in that old standard with Terror, and maybe we'll see that again. So there is always opportunity for that. So it's nice to, upcycle this card that is just going to kind of fall into obscurity is the wrong word here, because I would think commander players have known about this for a while, but a $40 price tag kind of makes it difficult for people to find. Like, what do I need for dragons? All right, how about anything under $10, $20? Well, Terror of the Peaks has been outside that search for a very long time.
Very long time.
So I would think that this pulls some eyes back, and if we get into playability, then it just jumps right back up to the $40 it was.
Yep.
I can't imagine this set is open for that long, as we are already starting to see leaks from MH3. Lord knows the set hasn't even released, and it's time to move on to Bloomburrow anyway. So
yep,
there's that. We have that look going for us, was that this could be a short open set with the next bunch of items coming down the pipe, or hype around other things starts happening. We see more spoilers for MH3, so people want to start saving money for that, or a Bloomburrow, so they stop spending on this, and so we have another short open set, whatever. It all factors into Terror of the Peak being a $20 card for not too much longer.
Nope.
So For me, I'm going the opposite direction. I'm sticking low to the ground, and I am looking at Leaf Crown Visionary. This is a pretty straightforward card when you both look at what it does in its stocks graph. This is double green for a 1/1 elf druid that says other elves you control get +1/+1, and then it has a trigger. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a green. If you do, draw a card. And as we can see on stocks, it's basically just been a frozen rope since its downward trend after release. And I'm finally looking at this after almost 5 months of it sitting on my list of things to look at. Card Kingdom was buying 59 copies at $2.50 earlier in the week. They're now buying 61 copies at $2.50. They had 8 for resale at $6.50, so that was almost like 300% increase on that one, so that's fun. On TCG Player, there were 323 listings with a $4 market. There are now 349 with a market price of $4.15. And when I look back at my data for December, Card Kingdom was buying 83 at $3.50, so drop in price, drop in quantity. They had 3 in stock. They were selling for $6, and TCG Player had about the same amount of listings, 342 at $3.30. So we're seeing, at least on the open market, that this is going up in price, which is basically where I kind of want to be for this card. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, when it comes to Commander, there's really only one thing you're doing with this card, and it is elf related. It doesn't matter how you're making your elves. If you're using something like Maskwood Nexus, like Voja is the most popular commander for this, and like that does utilize elves for what it does, but most people are playing Maskwood Nexus in that deck to make everything an elf anyway, so it's just kind of like easily slides in. But that's where we are. I don't think I've talked about a card this simple before. We're reading the card literally explains the card. We've said that a couple times. That's it.
But this is literally true.
There's no fat on this card. To quote Bill Burr, you need every word on this card to understand it. The format on the whole, this is going to be a pretty quick rundown because it really only goes into Commander decks that are playing primarily elves, leaning into both the passive Lord style ability of the +1/+1 and then the combo nature of the cast trigger. This card allows elves players to chain 3 spells at any point in the game with a trigger that is going to be pretty close to mana neutral, especially with something like Nettle Sentinel and Heritage Druid. Generally speaking, you can make a bunch of mana that way and just pay through it. So this is kind of like Glimpse of Nature in that way, where you just set up a big glimpse turn and you just draw a chunk of elves, right? So playing from ahead at parity or behind, Leaf Crown Visionary lets you close out the game by building a huge board state pretty quickly, and after that, it doesn't matter how you want to close it out. Enter combat, tap out for a big combat storm, nobody cares. This also plays in combo elf decks in both Pioneer and Modern, but these decks aren't that popular, so I wouldn't consider those formats to be a driver compared to Commander, where it slots into decks built around the second most popular creature type, according to Rec. We've already talked about that. Dragons, number 1. Elves, number 2. So we are looking at a card that is just prime for this strategy. As far as timeline is concerned, now, on TCG Player, this is selling at about 10 copies a day, which is not too much, but it is pulling quantity for a card that's been around for about a year and a half now. And this is a solidly over $4 card. In a few days, we've seen the market price go up just between earlier in the week when I took my notes and now. And in a few days, it'll be $5, and I think that's like 3 days out. Or maybe $4 in a few days, $5 in about a week or two. Now we need to wait for the low-hanging fruit that just entered the market to exit the market, and hope that nobody that is currently pricing over $5 prices down to $4. But we are going to get there pretty quickly. In another few weeks after the price jump to $5, we run almost immediately to $6, and that is probably about a month and a half out based on the data that's currently on TCG Player. Now, an interesting data point is that when you filter by quantity 4+, because a fair number of vendors are trying to appeal to buyers with a low price point, you actually find out that gotcha shipping on these can actually lead to you buying out their quantity and 1.5xing to Card Kingdom for credit. So they are using like $2 plus shipping to get people in on cards that are like $1 or so. So if you were to buy out their quantity, you can just sell that. You can just drop ship it to Card Kingdom immediately. I don't think I've seen that before for something this obvious on TCG Player. Like sometimes it's just natural arbitrage at the lower end. No, this is when you filter for 4. You just start seeing people that are selling for way, way, way too cheap. You just have to like move through the listings, or you had to move through the listings the other day. And I'd never seen that before. So I would expect this to move into open market. In about a month, 2 months, you should be able to get out of this at maybe $5.06. Otherwise, it's just going to be not sharing it probably about cents on the dollar for a little while. As far as buy lists are concerned, Card Kingdom has been severely lacking on this card compared to open market. The margin on this has been kind of rancid the entire way through. I honestly don't think we will see this card jump on buy lists probably for maybe another year, unless Elves just does something absolutely bonkers in Pioneer or Modern. The supply at vendor is just, it's not unending, but they don't want to re-up in infinite quantity. Sure, they're buying 56 now, but if they get 20 on that 56, that price is probably coming down to like $1 or $2 from the $2.50 it's at right now, just because their churn is not as good as what they're seeing on TCG Player. So I wouldn't rely on buy lists at all for this card. We're looking open market. We're looking about 2 months out. Reprint equity on this. So this is part of a cycle of Lords from Dominaria, and I don't think this cycle gets reprinted again in Standard, but it might be impactful enough for a Modern Horizon set if WotC wants to add one or more typal themes to it, which they have done before. That said, Modern Horizons 3 does seem to be starting with Eldrazi, so I would expect another one of these like Kins to show up alongside to give players a choice in the draft format. But once we're past MH3, I don't think we'll see these come back, as WotC tends not to reprint like New World Order style Lords that often, and instead they iterate on that design. More often than not, we see Old World Order designs upcycled. So for a good example of that is we got Goblin Pile Driver, we got Goblin Ringleader, we got Goblin War Chief, we got Goblin Matron, Skark Prospector, all upcycled from Onslaught and Saga. So like kind of that is that for sure, Old World Order. We've seen Lord of Atlantis upcycled, well, redressed in Master of the Pearl Trident.
Yeah.
And we've seen some Old World Order style zombie lords redressed into new zombie lords, because it's hard to really do much. That try was kind of left in the dust and lacking. It's like here's Regenerate, which they don't do anymore, or Swamp Walk, which they also really don't like. So your zombies just get kind of poo-pooed on. By quantity, I think I've got about 6 of these, a non-foil set to play at a number of foils that I picked up a few months after release while I was vending and things flattened out a bit, and that's perfectly fine for me. I wouldn't really want to go above 2 play sets. As this is primarily a commander card, we could run with 4 or 8, be fine with that. If you wanted to throw a little more at this and start listing at the 4+ quantity on TCG Player, you absolutely can, and you'll be able to start selling these at $5 in pretty short order if you were to pick up some of the lowest hanging fruit. Like I was saying, filter for 4, pick up some of the cheap ones and just relist at a realistic price, and don't like try and play the gotcha game with shipping. All good.
Don't be that guy, please.
It is what it is. But
the thing I really love about this card is that Dominaria United is probably one of the most forgotten about sets of the last 5 years. People just forget it happened. Not only that, there is the only product for it that is effectively left at distro in quantity is draft boosters. You know what no store is ever going to pay for?
Yeah, not again. Draft boosters.
Draft boosters.
Yep.
So you're seeing something where there realistically can't be much more placed on the market than what already exists there. What's laying around in distros isn't that much and is probably going to be distributed to a couple stores, if that. Mm-hmm. So what's there is there. It's a really popular tribe. It has casual appeal, and like you said, it can be kind of a combo enabler with a glimpse turn.
Yep.
There's a lot of reasons to like this card, and like you said, Lords aren't something that we revisit very often. We get iterated on instead, so there's almost no risk for reprint on this one. This is one that I just see naturally progressing. Like you said, it might be, 6 months, but it's just naturally going to continue to go up because there's not going to be more product opened. But I guarantee you more people are going to want to build elf decks. And you know what elf decks love? Lords.
Especially one that allows you to draw through the decks. The other Lords, generally speaking, all make mana to some degree, aside from literally the original elf. That just gave Forest Walk and from the original cycle of that style of Lord, where it gives +1/+1 and appropriate land walk.
Yeah.
Right. They all make mana to some degree, which is way too much for standard right now. You can't do that.
No.
But +1/+1 and a small little glimpse turn, yeah.
Pretty good.
Exactly, by all means. A good example of Dominaria United being forgotten, I was talking with somebody about Standard a month or so ago, and they reminded me that some of the work we were doing in Legacy around Beans meant that we could play Tolarian Terror in Standard alongside Beans because we'd forgotten that card hadn't rotated.
Yeah.
That it wasn't in Dominaria itself. It was in Dominaria United.
Yeah.
So, that's how long the set has been in Standard, how easily it was forgotten, and where we are now with it, to your point. And what you got?
That's all I got.
Okay. That's all I got for this week as well. So closing out the OTJ hype episode, we are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube. And if you want to get at us on Twitter, I am at Halt, I am Reptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
We'll see you next week.